I felt the same way she did. Despite it being our first meeting, we got along perfectly. I'm Henry, a 38-year-old single man. I've been working as a French lecturer at a private college, and recently, I was promoted to associate professor. My fascination with France began when I read a biography of Napoleon in elementary school. I still vividly remember being thrilled as a child by Napoleon's journey from his small island of Corsica to become an emperor through hard work. During my college years, I visited France for the first time through a homestay program. Seeing the Palace of Versailles, where Napoleon held his coronation, felt like a scene from history coming to life. Unable to forget that moment, I went on to graduate school and began researching the history of the French Revolution. Currently, while continuing my research, I teach French to students. Even during the summer break, I'm busy writing papers every day. However, since my sister and her husband's restaurant is busiest during this time, I help out there on Friday and Saturday nights during the summer break. My sister, Emily, who is 5 years younger than me, worriedly asked, "Are you sure it's okay to help us with the new semester preparations coming up?" "Yes, it's fine. Sitting and writing papers all the time can get overwhelming, so it's a good change of pace to move around. Plus, I owe you and Nate so much, let me repay you sometimes." Actually, Nate, my sister's husband, has been my best friend since college and has always looked out for me even after marrying Emily. Knowing I tend to neglect my diet due to my busy work schedule, Nate often brings me delicious food, for which I am truly grateful. When I expressed my gratitude, Emily smiled warmly and said, "Thank you." Wanting to help Emily and Nate as much as possible, I happily assisted at the restaurant, but in reality, I was troubled by a certain male customer. This man, named George, who is the same age as me, visited the restaurant every Friday evening. As soon as he burst through the door and spotted Emily, he loudly called out to her, "Here I am again. By the way, every time I come here, there are hardly any customers. Are you sure the business is doing all right?" Our restaurant is a small place with 4 tables and 5 seats by the counter, and at that time, George was the only customer. Other regulars had started coming at different times to avoid George's noisy visits on Friday evenings. Of course, we couldn't say that to George, so Emily responded with a polite smile, "Thanks to you, we are doing fine." Not wanting to burden Emily with George any longer, I suggested she move to the kitchen, and I took George's order. "Thank you for coming again. Are you ready to order?" "Well, I'll have a draft beer for now." "But Henry, don't you feel embarrassed working here out of pity from your sister and her husband?" George smirked at me as he said this. It seems he thought I was working part-time here because we had met 3 weeks in a row. Explaining the situation felt tedious, so I just went along with it. As usual, George started bragging about his job while sipping his beer. "Actually, I'm going to France for work next year. So, starting next month, I might not be able to come here as often." "Oh, really?" "I speak not only Japanese and English, but also French, German, and Chinese. An elite employee at a major trading company needs to be that proficient. It's probably a world unimaginable to a part-timer like you." Being trilingual myself, I was genuinely impressed by George's claim of speaking 5 languages. "That's impressive." I praised him, which pleased George and prompted him to order lots of food and drink. Getting happily drunk before leaving the restaurant about 2 hours later. As I was cleaning up George's leftovers, Emily voiced her concern. "Are you all right? It seemed like he was really bothering you again." "He started coming here about 3 months ago, and honestly, Nate and I don't know how to handle him. But we can't exactly tell him not to come either. Don't worry about me. I just go with the flow." Besides, George said he'll be coming less frequently from next month due to work. Emily furrowed her brows but said, "If you say so." Dealing with George was indeed stressful, but I thought it would only be for a little while longer. Then, one day, towards the end of summer break, George made me an offer. "Hey Henry, I bet you're free tomorrow, right? There's a mixer with some nurses, come with me." I was taken aback by the unexpected invitation, but George, already drunk, kept insisting, "Do you know how much money I've spent at this place?" While pounding the table. Fearing he might cause more trouble for Emily and Nate, I reluctantly agreed. Satisfied with my agreement, George said, "All right, see you tomorrow," and left the restaurant cheerfully. I had planned to help out at the restaurant the next night, but I couldn't back out of the promise now. When I told Nate and Emily in the kitchen about how I ended up being invited to the mixer, they were both shocked. Wow! George really is a selfish person. I'm speechless, Emily said, exasperated. Sorry about not being able to help out tomorrow like I planned, I said. Don't worry about the restaurant. It's been calmer lately, and we'll manage. Besides, it's a mixer, Henry. You should go and have fun. I bet you'll meet someone special. Nate encouraged me. Indeed, it might be a good opportunity. After not having a girlfriend for over 10 years, I had been thinking it was time to meet someone new. Taking Nate's advice, I decided to give the mixer my best shot. I thanked Emily and Nate and worked enthusiastically that night. The next day, I headed to the Italian bar George had specified. But as soon as I entered, I was taken aback. George had told me, even though it's a bar, it's a proper place, so wear a suit, but I was the only one who showed up in a suit. The bar had a casual atmosphere, and everyone else was in their regular clothes. The bar, known for its fusion of Italian and Japanese cuisine, had a decor that mixed both styles. Wine glasses made of lacquerware and Venetian glass vases with artificial cherry blossoms decorated the interior, giving it a playful touch. Usually, I would have enjoyed such a setting, but I felt out of place in my formal attire. Looking around, I saw George and the other participants already seated at a round table. Although I had arrived 10 minutes before the appointed time, I felt something was off. As I stood there, puzzled, George spotted me, pointed, and started laughing. Henry! Come on, man. I get that you're excited about the mixer, but showing up 20 minutes late in a suit? That's a fail for a grown-up. George said that and laughed exaggeratedly by himself. At that moment, I realized George's true intention. He had deliberately told me to wear inappropriate attire and given me the wrong meeting time. He probably invited me to the mixer just to make a fool out of me. As I stood there in shock, one of the female participants spoke up. No, not at all. I think his suit looks very nice. And George, it's not right to point and laugh at someone at a fun gathering, she said sharply. Chastised by the woman, George looked embarrassed and began to defend himself. Come on, Laura. I was just joking a bit. Henry. Just take a seat. It's your fault for being late in the first place. It seemed George didn't like being reprimanded by Laura. He glared at me, almost as if he was taking out his frustration. Perhaps Laura was the one he had his eye on tonight. Indeed, she was the most beautiful among the 5 female participants. She had big, well-defined eyes, a sculpted face, and curly brown hair, giving her an exotic allure. Her brightly colored dress suited her perfectly. Sorry, I said, bowing my head to George. Seeing an empty seat next to Laura, I quickly sat down beside her and thanked her. Thank you for earlier. I felt a bit out of place in my suit, but your support helped. She smiled warmly at me. You're welcome. It really suits you. I'm Laura. Nice to meet you. I'm Henry. Nice to meet you too. The introductions had already been done before I arrived, and the participants were chatting freely. So, I decided to enjoy my meal while talking with Laura. Through our conversation, I learned that Laura was 30 years old and worked as a nurse at X hospital. Her clear and confident way of speaking made me like her naturally. Despite her stunning looks, she was approachable and kind, embodying the ideal qualities of a nurse. Suddenly, George moved his chair to forcibly squeeze in between Laura and me. He seemed determined to talk to her. Laura, you shouldn't waste your time talking to Henry. George, I already told you to stop looking down on people like that. However, Laura seemed uninterested in engaging with George. She likely disliked how he constantly belittled me. In fact, when I arrived late, none of the other members had laughed at me like George did, and now George was isolated in the group. Realizing this, George became more desperate to put me down. Laura, he's 38 and working part-time at his sister's restaurant. Don't you think I'm way more reliable than him? He insisted. Annoyed by his words, I was about to retort. But just then, there was a loud crash in the bar, and I instinctively looked towards the sound. To my shock, there was a woman collapsed on the floor, with her husband crouched beside her, panicking. The bar staff were trying to communicate with him, but since he was a foreigner, they couldn't understand each other. Seeing this, Laura said, "George, you're a multilingual, right? Can't you help translate?" George hesitated but replied weakly, "Of course," and approached the foreign man. The man, who seemed to be in his 50s, started speaking in heavily accented English, influenced by his native French. However, the accent was too strong for George to understand clearly. Even though he went to translate, George stood there bewildered, saying, "I don't understand." Unable to watch any longer, I stood up and moved beside George. George snapped, "Stay out of this." Ignoring him, I addressed the man in French, "What happened?" The man, relieved, began to explain the details in French. He said that his wife felt unwell after drinking wine and needed an ambulance immediately. I translated this to the female staff, who promptly called 119, saying, "Thank you so much." Laura then approached and offered, "I'm a nurse, so I can help if needed." The staff, reassured by having a medical professional on hand, handed the phone to Laura. While Laura communicated with the emergency services, I continued to translate the man's explanations to her. "Where are you, and what's the emergency?" "We're at an Italian bar, and a female foreigner is feeling unwell. She skipped her usual blood pressure medication this morning before going to the hot springs. According to her husband, she spent a long time in the hot springs, and after drinking a glass of wine at the bar, she felt unwell and collapsed from her chair." Hearing this, Laura relayed the woman's medical history and situation to the paramedics. While waiting for the ambulance, Laura asked the staff for something to place under the woman to ensure her safety. The staff quickly brought a mattress from the office room. Laura and I moved the woman's body onto the mattress, and Laura positioned her in the recovery position to secure her airway. I'm laying her on her side to keep her airway open. I immediately translated Laura's words to the husband. He understood the situation and, with tears in his eyes, repeatedly said, "Thank you." Soon, the ambulance arrived, and the woman was swiftly transported to the hospital. As I translated Laura's words to the husband, the bar quieted down as if a storm had passed. Laura and I were thanked by all the bar staff, who said, "You saved us," as we headed back to the table where the mixer was taking place. There, George, who had been keeping a low profile until now, nervously sweating, asked me, "Henry, who are you?" "Actually, I'm a French language lecturer and recently became an associate professor." An associate professor. He had always looked down on me, thinking I was just a part-timer, never imagining I was an associate professor. The other participants praised me, saying, "That's amazing. You spoke French so fluently, Henry." It was really impressive. "No, not at all. Laura, you were amazing as well. As expected of a nurse." As we exchanged compliments, the other participants started clapping and cheering, saying, "You two make a great team. I never expected things to turn out this way." Feeling embarrassed, I scratched my head, blushing. While Laura and I received applause for our teamwork, George suddenly stood up roughly and said, "I'm leaving," before storming out of the bar. For a moment, the room fell silent due to George's abrupt departure. One of George's colleagues then spoke up. George probably didn't like seeing Henry speak French better than him. He has a big ego and always wants to look good. But his practical language skills aren't that great. Honestly, I'm not even sure if he really is multilingual. Everyone nodded in agreement with the colleague's assessment. I had the same impression. George always needed to be the center of attention. Today, he invited me with the intention of belittling me, but ended up embarrassing himself instead. Thinking about it, George seemed rather pitiable. The rest of the evening went smoothly, and we enjoyed the mixer with smiles all around. I exchanged contact information with Laura, making the night a great success. After that mixer, Laura and I started dating. I had found her attractive and wonderful from the moment we met, but our shared experience of contacting the paramedics brought us closer together. When I confessed my feelings, she told me, "Watching you handle everything so fluently in French, I was instantly captivated. It's never happened to me before." Now that I'm dating such an amazing woman, I feel genuinely grateful to George for providing the opportunity. However, since that mixer, George hasn't visited Emily and Nate's restaurant, so I haven't seen him to express my thanks. I wondered if he was busy preparing for his business trip to France, but it seems that story was just another fabrication. In hindsight, it seems belittling me at Emily's restaurant was the only thing that gave George a sense of superiority. By the way, the French couple we encountered that night at the mixer visited the bar again once the wife had recovered. The husband left a letter for me with the staff before they returned to France. The organizer of the mixer contacted me, and we arranged a meeting where he handed me the letter. Nervously, I opened it to find a photo of the smiling couple. Thank you so much for your help the other day. Thanks to your translation, my wife has fully recovered. We also want to thank your nurse girlfriend again. Please, both of you come visit us in France. My wife and I would love to show you around. I showed the letter to Laura, and she smiled with joy. They thought we were a couple back then. I've decided. Our honeymoon destination should be France. Wait, Laura, does that mean? I asked, and Laura, blushing, gently took my hand. I don't want to let go of this hand. I thought instinctively, and with that momentum, I proposed to her, marry me. 1 year after meeting Laura. Laura and I were at Charles de Gaulle Airport together. In the distance, we saw the couple waving at us. Seeing them, Laura smiled and waved back, her engagement ring sparkling as if predicting the wonderful journey that was about to begin.